already started the project. Your meetings start this week, so make sure you have your meeting scheduled, meet with your team. The Project 1 doc, I'm getting that out as soon as I can, but I want to give you just another quick reminder on what that's going to be so you can get started in your meetings today. If you're meeting today, I want to make sure you know what the current objective is to be able to solve. And with these 5 bullet points, I'm going to look for phase 1, a GUI that has these 5 things on it somewhere. So you don't have to have any functionality at this point, but I'm going to look for, okay, where on this page would there be a user account? So if there's a button that says log on, cool. Some static, some fixed content that can be displayed on the page. So like sharing multimedia content, if there's just an image there that looks, that makes it clear that that would have been an image that would have been uploaded by a user, cool. And then like an upvote, downvote button, whatever, comment section, whatever you want there. Just getting the layout of your page to make sure that that it's clear what the idea is. From your phase 1 submission, it should be clear. Open up your HTML, and what your page is going to be should be clear just from the layout, the buttons, the display, everything that's there. And then all the buttons, you can click on them and they don't have to do anything. They might do nothing at all. That's perfectly fine. For phase 1, phase 2 is where we'll start building functionality, but just the layout, the front end should be there. We're also going to deploy with Docker. This is a topic that we'll talk about at length next week. So getting your hosting together as well. So you don't have to build any functionality on the back end, but you do have to host your static files. So kind of like homework 3, where you're just sending your front end to the user. We need to have that kind of functionality. And again, you can use frameworks, but do the documentation as we discuss at length at other times. So you can use, if you want to use something like Express, fill out a report for all the things that you're using Express for. If you're using it for routing and hosting static files, which you'll be probably doing at least that for this first submission for phase 1. Fill out the report for that functionality for whatever framework you end up pulling in for that. So that'll be what the phase 1 objectives will be. Are there any questions about that? Is everyone clear on at least what their immediate task is that you can get started this week in your meetings? Yes. Yes. Yeah. So, and you can use libraries for anything on the project. You just got to fill out a report for each one. So for this one, you can use one of your servers for your homeworks if you'd like to build one from scratch. I'm not going to prevent that. You'd save yourself the reports. But I would recommend using frameworks for this. Pull in something, Express, Django, Flask, for some framework that's going to do that. For phase 1, you just have to be hosting your static files and doing the routing. The routing might just be the static files, depending on what you do for this. So it could be like a 1-line server if you use a framework. Host all my files in this directory, and the root directory point to index.html, or however you have it set up. So there wouldn't be much to the framework. The server wouldn't have much functionality at this point. But you could pull in a framework to do that. Okay, for those of you who didn't see the Piazza post, the homework 4 deadline is moved. It's going to be a week from today, so it's going to be next Monday at midnight. I have a policy that I hold myself to is I always give students at least 1 week from the time I present content to the time that you have to submit a major homework assignment where you have to apply that concept. I didn't get the templates like I wanted to last Friday. I'm getting to it today properly. I just did a really quick run through on Friday. And since you have to do templates on that assignment, I didn't get to this content, so I want to give you 24 hours at least, 1 week at least by the end of this lecture, so that deadline's moved. And to be honest, homework 4, we can all use more time with that. That's more office hours. We'll be able to go to Nick's office hours on Monday. It's more time you have the weekend to work on. Homework 4 could really use all that time. And with homework 4, I keep forgetting to mention this, so I'm going to mention this right at the top. I mentioned homework 4 is, in my opinion, a make or break assignment. And last time I mentioned that, I talked a lot about the break part. It's a big step up in difficulty, and it's going to be a difficult assignment. It's going to need the attention that it deserves. But I didn't talk much about the make part. If you can do homework 4, if you make it through this assignment, again, in my opinion, because you all have different experiences going through this. In my opinion, if you can make it through homework 4, by next Monday you submit and you did fine on homework 4, you're going to be okay for the rest of the semester. There's not going to be another difficulty spike like this one. It's not going to be a jump up. And I believe homework 5 is going to be a decrease in difficulty from homework 4, which is good because you might only have 4 days to work on that one. So if you can make it through this homework, I know this one's tough. It's a big jump up. But if you can make it through this one, I think you're going to be fine. There's not another huge jump up like this. There's a possible exception to that with streaming towards the end and maybe encryption, but you got 2 drops. So, if you make it through homework 4 and you do the other manageable assignments and drop those difficult ones, you got it. You're there. So with that, any other questions before I get into it? Before I start talking about templates? And not to say that it won't be a lot of work. It'll still be a lot of work. There will be assignments more difficult than homework 4, but it won't be a big jump up. You'll be a lot more prepared for those assignments, so they'll probably feel easier. When you're coding WebSockets, for example, it's probably tougher than homework 4, but after having the experience of homework 4, I think that homework 6 is going to feel easier just because you'll be much more comfortable with working in this domain and working with this kind of material. But not to say that any of these assignments will be easy, but if you can make it through homework 4, you're going to be good to go, in my opinion. I'll always qualify it with that. All right, homework, HTML templates. So we have this problem that we're facing, that we're starting to see, especially in the assignments, where we want to serve custom content, but we want to serve custom web content. So how do we serve an HTML file with custom content on it, which is, of course, very common on the internet and any web apps. We almost faced this problem a few times, but I carefully crafted the objectives to be able to not have to face this problem. In homework 3, you had these two issues where you need to send different content based on whether or not a cookie is set. And so we want custom content in our HTML. We got around this by just saying, okay, create 2 separate HTML files. Check if the cookie's set or not, and then serve one or the other file, just whole shot, just send the whole file. So we're not making different content based on that cookie. But what if you have something where you want to adjust based on the value of that cookie, and you want different content based on that value? Are you going to have millions of these files, or are you going to try to create an HTML file for every single possible value of that cookie? Well, that's completely impractical. It's not really feasible. So we would like to do this, just for example, somebody logs on and you want to have their username in the corner of the HTML. Do you have a separate HTML file for every single user? No, absolutely not. But how do we solve that? How do we do that? How do we address that situation? The last part of homework 3, we did do something like this. You took the query string, you took the values from the query string and served custom content based on those values. But we craftily used plain text instead of HTML to get around that issue as well. So we sent plain text, we just concatenated a string and then sent it on its way, instead of embedding that information inside HTML itself. So what if we do want to put this information in HTML? That's where we're going to use HTML templates. So these, instead of writing all of your HTML in a file and having a fully written page in a .html file, now we're going to write incomplete HTML files with some placeholder variables and a little bit of extra markup to be able to tell us how to finish this HTML file programmatically. So we have this template which is going to be used to generate our HTML, but we're going to generate it at runtime. Once we have the information that we want to embed in that page, we're going to take the template, take the data, combine them, generate our HTML, and then send that HTML on its way. So there are a lot of approaches, and this is a common theme through this course, but this is another case for on the homeworks, you'll have a lot of flexibility on how you do this. I'll show you one way to do it. I'm actually going to use syntax from a library called Handlebars, a template engine that does this. But you can use any approach that you want whenever we have this situation, whenever you have to generate custom HTML. But I'll focus on the concept and the idea. How could you do this? And here's one example. I'm going to have placeholder variables in my HTML using special syntax. The syntax itself doesn't matter too much. This is what Handlebars uses, as I mentioned. But the syntax should not be mistaken for HTML content. Like this should be very distinct from our other our HTML in this document. We should have some way of noting this so that we can easily parse through this template. So I use the double braces and then a variable name inside those double braces. This gives me just some way to clearly identify this is part of the template, not part of a completed HTML. Other than that, we're just writing HTML as usual and just adding these variables in wherever necessary.
Are we going to use a library like Handlebars?
For the same rules apply. For the project, yes. For the homework, no. So the question was, can we use a library like Handlebars? For the homework, no. Any of this stuff, really no libraries for the homework. Beyond what we've already used, the TCP, and anything you need to get concurrency up and running if it's not already built into your TCP library. Other than that, no, nothing. So for homework 4, we have this issue, and realistically, the way I wrote up the description, I did this on purpose. Realistically, you don't have to necessarily even use an HTML template for homework 4. You just have, but you do have this situation where you have to, display every image on a page all at the same time. So we have this custom content we need to generate. When you write this code, you don't know what images users have uploaded. So how do you know what to write in this HTML? So we have the general idea is to look at what images have been uploaded and add an image tag on our HTML for every single image. So the standard approach to this would be to use the idea of HTML templating, but we can't do what we just saw on the previous slide and just have placeholder variables. We need a little bit of control flow inside of our HTML at this point. So how do we do this? We can add some more syntax and have control flow right in our HTML using the concepts that we know. The beginning of a loop block, the end of a loop block, and then everything inside is going to be generated for each value of some data structure that you're using as the data to render this template. And we could do the same thing with if. I believe that's, but we can add this syntax. Any templating engine is going to have at least support for variables, loops, and conditionals to be able to generate some more complex content, then usually quite a few other features as well. At the very least, for homework 4, you'll need some sort of loop in your code. So some way to mark that, hey, this HTML has some placeholder variable, and that should be replaced for each value in a data structure. So for this, you'll look for your loop tags, take whatever's in between, and then iterate over your data structure, your list of file names for homework 4 in this case. So you have a list of strings for all the file names. Then you would have an image tag with src equals, and then in quotes, some placeholder variable. Look for your loop tags. Take everything in between the two loop tags. Replace that placeholder variable with a value in that data structure, one of those file names, and concatenate that content inside the loop tags with the placeholder variable replaced for every single value in that data structure. So this is one approach you can use to get all of those images embedded in your HTML, even though you don't have all the content when you write the code. So you can have more dynamic HTML, and that's our big goal, having dynamic HTML that depends on the current state of the server, in this case, the current images that have been uploaded. Yes?
So we may not use a templating library, we have to write template code?
Yes.
But before you said we were allowed to use a regex library.
Yeah, you can use regex, yes.
So you can use a regex library to find your special tokens.
Yes.
And then replace them.
That'd be the recommended approach. Yeah, you can use regex, but not a library that just does everything for you. I try to stay fairly light on the templating because of that. One loop, if you can write for one HTML template, one loop, that's really your task. You're not building a whole templating engine with all its features. You need this one piece of functionality, this one idea. And just to kind of flash back to things I've said earlier in the semester, the idea here is when you do get your hands on a templating engine, either for your project or out there in industry, you at least have an idea of what that thing's doing for you. It's mostly doing a lot of string parsing. And you'll get your hands dirty with some string parsing here, and then when you do have that templating engine, you'll appreciate it, I guarantee that. You'll appreciate having that engine that just does all this stuff for you. You can just add your loop variables in there and get that done. But one of the huge themes of this course is when you do have all these libraries, what are those libraries actually doing for you? And you can make better decisions out there in industry on which libraries are doing things that you actually don't want to do yourself, that you need to pull in a library. Where can you get rid of that dependency and just build that small set of functionality in-house? For example, a lot of sites have very huge, bulky libraries on the front end that have to be downloaded every single time you visit a page. What are those libraries doing for you? Do you actually need them? Do you actually have to have every client downloading all of jQuery when you just need that one little feature, or can you just build that feature? I want you to be able to make decisions like that. And maybe the answer is just, yeah, use all the libraries, but at least if you can make an informed decision. That's what we want to get to in this course. Does that mean we can't use HTML, DOM, and JavaScript? Anything, the front end, all the DOM, JavaScript, if it's naturally in the browser, you can use those front end libraries. So like today, we're going to use some AJAX. You can just use AJAX built in, but you can't pull in, and we won't do much front end stuff in the homeworks anyway, but you can't like pull in jQuery, you can't pull in Ember came to mind for some reason. You can't pull in the front end frameworks. I was just looking at them. How am I blanking on this? Anyway, but you can use a lot of the front end stuff, the HTML, DOM, and JavaScript. You can certainly use all that stuff. Yeah.
Is it better to do templating on the back end or the front end?
That's an excellent question. I mean, I have like 3 or 4 slides in the next slide set to talk about that. That is an excellent question. There's no one answer is going to be what we'll see. But so the question is it better to do templating on the front end or the back end? There's no one good answer for this. It'll depend on the application, the specific app, on where if you want to do server-side HTML templating, or if you want to do client-side templating and just host your data with an API. It's a big design decision that each app needs to go through. We could also do conditionals. You won't need this for homework 4, but I wanted to at least mention it. So we can do conditionals. Realistically, I mean, you can do whatever you can code. Any ideas that you have that you can find a way to implement, you can do. There's no magic here. It's just putting tags and then looking for those tags in your code. But we can do conditionals in most templating engines. I should say all. I'd be surprised if any didn't. Can have some form of conditional. If some variable, do this, else do that, and they'll have else if usually. The usual control flow that we like to see. So I very, very quickly showed this last time. Let's show this in more depth. So here's the template that I had in the slides. Well, let's actually use this. See, just seeing the template doesn't tell us too much. Let's see how to use this template. For this, if I have a path for /Discord, which there was a little chat after I showed this last time, so maybe the Discord lives. We'll see. It's on life support. But so if we get the path Discord, I'm going to render my template. I'm going to give it the template file name and all of the values for those placeholder variables. So I have a title, description, and image file name that I know are in my template. So I know these placeholders are in my template, and I'm going to give them values. So I'm going to say each one of these placeholders, these are the values that they should be set to. And then in my template, I'll show this. The render template. I don't have a loop anyway, so I'm not spoiling much. I'm going to open that file name and just do what you would expect. I'm just going to do some string manipulation here. I'm going to open that file name, and for each of those key value pairs, look for that key in my template and replace it with the value. So for the loop, you would say, pull up the template, find the either use regex and extract that in a nice way like that, or find the index of your start of your loop tag, find the index of your end of your loop tag, grab everything in between, extract that as a string, remove your loop tags and all of that, and then at that place in your HTML template, keep concatenating in for each iteration of your loop, looping over your image file names, replace those placeholders for each of those values, and just keep concatenating it in your HTML. So you can kind of get an idea of how that could go. Again, this is one approach. If you have an approach that works better for you, by all means, go for it on the homework. But this is one approach. Put those placeholders, look for those placeholder tags in your code, and then modify that template. And then, of course, return the completed template. And of course, that template's rendered. So we have this template. We replace those placeholders with our specific values, and we have one HTML template that can generate a lot of but a lot of different content. So this template doesn't know a single thing about Discord. That word doesn't appear anywhere in this template, but I use this template to generate a page about Discord. I could use this template to generate a page about anything as long as it fits this template, a title, description, in one image. As long as it has those three things, you can just generate any content I want using a single template. And where this really comes in handy, what we really gain from this is, one, the flexibility of generating dynamic content, but also a separation of concerns is one of those buzzwords out there. We have our HTML, which is the structure of our page, and we're separating that from any data that we have. So we have some data that we want to display. The data only cares about the data, and the HTML is only caring about the structure of the page. Just like the CSS is only caring about the style of the page, the JavaScript is only caring about the functionality. We have all these things separately, so now we can have functions that generate this content, talk to our database, and process this in any ways that we want to handle to get the data. And while we're coding that, we don't care about how the data is going to be displayed on the page. We only care about that when we're looking at the template. And then we have our render functionality, which is going to combine a template with data, combine those to actually generate the content we're going to send to the end user. Helps us organize our code and our apps. You can imagine when these web apps get huge, when there's hundreds of thousands of lines of code, having a separation of concerns is critically important. If you have 80,000 lines of code that just determines when somebody requests a specific path, what data are we going to serve? You don't want to also add to that, how is that data going to be displayed, and mix it in with the same code. Having the separation concerns really saves us when these projects grow in size. Okay, any questions about HTML templating? Oh, I'm going to go to the course website. Okay, so homework 5 is upon us. Like I said earlier, I do believe this is a step down in difficulty from homework 4. I believe everyone will agree with that, but we'll see as we go through it. There might be something that'll trip you up that I haven't quite foreseen. But I think this one is decently straightforward. In fact, we're not going to need the whole week of content. We've been getting a little behind on these lectures, but Friday, if you look at the schedule, I changed that to review and catch up. I just won't need all 3 lectures to cover the AJAX content that we're going to talk about. So we'll get caught up by the end of this week, and then next week we can start fresh with deployment. So, and I might use a lot of Friday's lecture just for homework 4 help and reinforcing those concepts as you're going through that. So homework 5, make an AJAX GET request. So request a page. So somebody goes to your home page, requests the path /. Your content is served, and then after that content is served, after the HTML says, okay, you need CSS, JavaScript, whatever else, all of those requests are resolved. After all of that happens, make another request using what we call AJAX to get additional content, get the response, and then display that content on your page after the page loads, importantly. Do the same thing with a post request, so have some sort of way for the user to submit information to your server after the page loads, and do something with that content. You don't have to return anything from this post, but get that information from the user after the page loads without reloading the page, importantly. It's going to be a theme when we talk about AJAX. We don't want the page to be reloading. Write another AJAX GET request that's going to get the content that was posted here. So effectively what we're building is the functionality for a chat app, and in my slides I'll go through a chat app exactly to show that functionality. So the users can post data. If we think of this as chat, they can type messages and send them to the server, and then a path that's going to get all the content, to get all of the chat history, everything that people have submitted. You can get that again after the page loads without reloading the page. Then the last one, polling, which is going to, at regular intervals, request that information and then return that information. To be honest, Objective 4 is pretty free. If you do the first 3, this is a one-liner to do the polling. But we'll talk about polling. Polling will be more of a lecture topic. I want to talk about this idea and what polling is and what we can do with it. For the assignment, for the code, it's one line. It's set interval, and then your function that makes this request for Objective 3. But once we have that, we'll actually have a live chat app built from scratch, from TCP. This is a crazy accomplishment in 6 weeks, 7 weeks. 6 weeks. So from just a TCP socket, building the full functionality of a chat app. That's where we'll be by the end of this lecture. By the end of this lecture. But by the end of this homework, that's where you'll be. So how do we do that? Let's pull in this new technology named AJAX. And now is a good time as any to I don't know, vent my thoughts on this or something. But when it comes to web technology, I don't know why, but everything has a separate acronym. AJAX, there's nothing special about this. It's asynchronous JavaScript in the A and XML, but that kind of is deprecated. It's just making an asynchronous JavaScript call. It's just JavaScript, but it's another piece of functionality that we can do with JavaScript. Giving this its own acronym and its own topic is kind of like saying, hey, here's programming, now let's learn loops, and treating that as its own thing with its own acronym and stuff. It's kind of annoying because it makes web development look a lot more complicated than it is. We have, just so far in this course, we have TCP, HTML, HTTP, CSS, JavaScript, AJAX, and several others I'm sure I'm forgetting. But there's so many acronyms, it makes it look like a big pool of technologies, but really it's just other features and some of the same technologies, depending on how you look at it. The advantage, so it can look intimidating. The advantage to this, though, it looks awesome on a resume. You can take this one class and add a whole section with all these acronyms. It looks great. So use that to your advantage. It does look intimidating, but it also looks intimidating to your hiring managers. If you're submitting a resume to HR, they're going to be blown away like, holy crap, CSS and HTML, whoa. So make sure you get all of those acronyms on your resume, especially after taking this course. But here's one more acronym. It's not that big of a deal, but it is a new acronym, so AJAX. So what do we want? What's our goal here? We want more interaction between our site. We want to be able to have our users interact with each other. So we have two users connecting to our server. We want the server to act as that proxy for these users to be able to communicate with each other. That's really a lot of what we want in our web apps. Without that, if we don't want user interactions, we really don't need too much technology on our web server. We can just serve a static front-end only website, and that's probably good enough for those purposes. But we want our users interacting with each other. That's really the big reason. In my opinion, maybe that's contested by someone. But we really want our users to be able to interact with each other through the web server. Really, if you don't have that, why are you even online? You can just be a desktop app. If you aren't leveraging the internet to talk to other humans, to communicate with other humans. So we want this interactivity, and with what we have right now, say we're going to build a chat app in this with these slides. We want a chat app. There's a text box. You can type your message. You can click send. With what we have right now, that would be an HTML form, which is going to make a GET or POST request with that, POST for, we could do it with GET, but let's just say a POST request with that information in the body. We're going to get some response from that POST request, and we're going to render that response. Whatever that response is, that's the new page that you're looking at. So what we can do is just send in that response the same page that the user was looking at, and then have that page be reloaded. But this is not great. It's going to trigger a refresh, and there's some problems with this. I thought I had a slide with all the problems. No, I know I have a slide with all the problems. I made that. Yeah, just way later. Well, I want to talk about it now. So that page refresh causes some issues. At best, the user's going to notice some flickering. At worst, it's going to take a while to load, and every time they submit a message, they got to wait a few fractions of a second for this page to reload, re-render, get all the information back on the screen. That alone is annoying. Their back button is going to be broken at that point. So if you send like 20 messages, and you want to go back to the previous page you were visiting, well, you got to click back 20 times because all those page reloads are in the browser history. maybe not the biggest deal, but it can get annoying from a UX experience. And how does the user get the, oh, I do have this bullet point. How does the user get the updates? Somebody else, I'm sitting here, sitting on the chat app, not touching any buttons, and somebody else submits a message to the chat. How do I see that message without reloading the page? I either have to click refresh, or I gotta send my own message, click send, and then get the newly, freshly rendered HTML template with that new message. And since I couldn't see that message, I can't respond to that. We're gonna be, it's just gonna be a mess. So we need something better, and that something better is going to be AJAX, of course. So the goal is to build this chat app. I want users to have some sort of form. They can submit messages, and the chat history updates automatically. We won't get to the automatic updates until next lecture when we talk about polling, but we want this kind of live chat experience. Pretty common. We've all used chat apps. This is what we want. Going to use AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript, and XML. That was the original acronym. The acronym actually has been deprecated. It's just AJAX. AJAX is just AJAX now. But that's what it originally was making asynchronous JavaScript requests after the page loads without a reload. So let's jump right into the code. Then we'll back up a bit after the code and see why we're doing this. So we're going to use this XML HTTP request, which I wish that by now, I wish they would just rename this as AJAX request. But the name is what it is, XML HTTP request. This is in every browser. Every browser will have this functionality. We can write our JavaScript with just using this. It's built into the browser. We can count on it being there. And you can use this. This would be on the, I guess, whitelisted libraries or something. Any front-end functionality that's built into every browser, that's all on the table. You can use any of that stuff, as was asked in the chat earlier. I didn't make that very clear earlier, but I'll make it clear now. Any of that you can use, but don't pull in any external JavaScript front-end libraries. All right, so we're going to create this new object, and there are a few things we have to do to make this work. We're going to use open, call the open method, set the method and the path for this request, then the send method, which is going to make a request of that type to that path. So now and that's at a very high level, that's it. Everything else is the same that we've been doing elsewhere in the course. On the server side, this is exactly the same. The server is just getting a request, a get request for /path. So your server doesn't change at all. Your server doesn't care if it's an AJAX request or a page load or whatever kind of request. Your server is just going to serve content. And from this side, in your JavaScript, in your front-end JavaScript, that's it. Create a new XML HTTP request, open it, send it, and that's going to send an AJAX request after the page loads whenever this JavaScript is executed. So we could have this JavaScript attached to a button, and this is called and made every time a button is clicked, or however else you want to interact with your JavaScript. All that stuff way back from week 1, talking about events, JavaScript events, and tying into those events. Anything we can do there, we can have some JavaScript code that's going to make a request. A request is only half of the battle. We want responses as well. So the server's going to respond with some content. And for that, we use this onReadyState change. So our request is going to have what's called a ready state in it. It has 5 different states. The only one we're too concerned about for our purposes is 4, which means all of the information from that response is ready to be read. We got all the response. It's all ready. It's ready to be processed. So whenever the ready state changes, you're going to give this a function that's going to be called on that event, on that ready state change event. And then we're going to check, is the ready state 4? So did the ready state change to the completed state where I can start processing this? And is the HTTP status code 200? So is everything okay with the response? If the whole response is here and ready, and it's not a 404 or a 500 or anything like that, it's a 200 response, it's an okay, everything went fine, then I want to process the response. This example, I'm just printing it to the screen, but this is where you do everything, whatever you want to do, for whatever reason you requested some content from the server after this page loaded, do whatever you need to do with that content, whatever your goal was for that content. And realistically, this is most of it. This is how we do JavaScript on the front end. The rest is going to be architecture. What do we do with this ability, this newfound ability to make requests after the page loads, and why would we even want to do that? If we want to make a post request, change the request type to post. And now when we call send, we're going to give it an argument that's going to be the information to be sent. Everything else is the same as the GET request. We just change GET to post and give the body of this, this request in the send method.
So are we, with this, are we gonna need to change it up to be able to read JSON blobs to parse those by hand? Cause those, I know JSON blobs are bytes, but like, there's a lot of extra stuff.
I do have a solid answer for you, but it's kind of a shaky answer, I guess. So the question is, do we have to parse this JSON now? There's no requirement in the course that you have to use JSON, but that JSON is one of the best solutions to communicate this information. And I'll whitelist any JSON libraries as well, only because Python and JavaScript, for example, both have, you just JSON and parse it. We don't need to be parsing JSON. And you can import libraries if you have a language that doesn't have that built-in functionality. Feel free to pull in a JSON library. So if you do want to use JSON, feel free to pull in a library. We're doing enough string parsing with the HTTP. JSON, and here's the distinction. JSON is not a topic that I'm teaching in this course, so it's not something I really care if you're parsing or not. All the HTTP stuff, and the HTML templating included, those are topics that we're covering in the course, so I need you to be doing those things, or else why are you even here? If you're just going to pull in a library to solve the course for you, there's no point.
Why does JSON have to be used?
It doesn't have to be used. So why does JSON have to be used? It doesn't have to be used. It's any bytes that we can send. In this case, I'm just giving it a string, and send is doing the conversion to bytes for me, and then sending it. You don't have to use JSON. I just happen to use it for this example. It's recommended. JSON is pretty standard out there on the internet. If you're communicating information, it's almost always going to be JSON these days. But that's not going to be a requirement. If you can solve the same problems that JSON is solving with some other technology or some other format for your information, by all means, go for it. I recommend JSON, but I will not require that for this course, for any of the assignments you have to do. Any other questions on this one? Okay, but why? Why do we want to make these? Of course, we had the slides at the beginning, but let's revisit this. Why would we actually want to do this? What is this going to do for us? So one, we get, potentially anyway, faster page loads. So if you have a site with a lot of content that takes a long time to generate on each request, it's going to take your site quite a while to load. And if your site takes a while to load, a lot of users, myself included usually, won't even wait. Like if the site's taking more than a second or two to load, I'm going somewhere else. Unless it's something that I really needed. If it's the hub, I'm going to wait for the hub, unfortunately. But if it's something non-essential, like I just clicked a link on Reddit and it's taking a while to load, I'm getting out of there. I ain't got to wait. I ain't got time for that. So we want faster page loads. So with AJAX, what we can do is load the HTML and the structure of the page almost immediately, just with the network delay. We have that content on hand. It's ready. We get that first request. We just send the HTML right away. And then we have JavaScript running to make these AJAX requests for the more complex content. So when I have this more complex content, it's going to be an AJAX request. My server's going to do what it needs to do to process that request. It's going to go to talk to the database. It's going to run some algorithms. It's going to do what it needs to do and give the user something to look at while that's happening, and then send that content back in the AJAX response, and then that content will be added to the page after the page load. And you see this all over the internet these days. This is pretty standard. Any page, any major site, it seems like you go to these days, the site loads really fast, and then the content starts populating after the page loads. Those are the AJAX requests being sent and coming back, and you can see as those AJAX responses come back, you start getting all the content for your page. It starts populating. With the new Reddit, it does this. You go to the page, the site shows up, but there's no posts, and then all of a sudden the posts appear a fraction of a second later, or sometimes a full second later if it's really slow. Unfortunately, unfortunately or fortunately, I guess it depends on your perspective. A lot of times this is just used to give us ads. Did I? Yeah, I did. I thought I made that bullet point. This is the server taking a long time to figure out which ads to shove in your face. That takes a lot of processing. They have to look at your specific use cases, run those algorithms, and figure out what's that ad that has the maximum probability of you specifically clicking on it. Well, that takes a while to process. It takes some server CPU and time to process. So those ads typically don't load immediately. Those ads are going to be some of the last things to load on your page, just because of how complex those algorithms, all the AI and machine learning, everything that's behind the scenes that has to run, just takes a while. So if your page didn't load at all until all those ads were ready, it's just going to be too long for the page to load. No one's going to wait that long. Some people will, but you're going to lose traffic. We also get an improved user experience, so all the stuff we were talking about with the chat app, it's just a smoother experience. Your page doesn't have to reload on every request, so you don't get that flicker. You don't get your browser history plugged up with a bunch of requests, and you don't have to make a request response and reload the whole page to see any updated content. You can just sit there on the page and watch the content come in as it's ready, as the server has it, when we get to polling next time at least. And think of streaming content. If you're trying to watch this on Twitch right now, what if every time a few more frames were recorded on my laptop and sent to Twitch, you had to click refresh to see those frames? Or maybe the site did this automatically and your screen was just constantly flashing every time there were new frames available. It'd be completely prohibitive. Oh, I realize we're out of time. All right. I'll see everyone Wednesday.